poor kids, they don't even know what hit them when they moved there, I'm sure. But Jack has been performing cowboy poetry professionally for about 5 years. And his very first poem was when he was in kindergarten, right? The very first poem he ever did was in kindergarten. And he loves the Western way of life. It's very precious to him. And he wants to keep the history and the whole life alive through his poetry. So it's very important to him. And so please welcome to the stage, Jack George.
Thank you, guys. Well, Mom, you're moving up in the world. You even get a little introduction now.
That was my 3 seconds of fame. She promised me I could have 3 seconds.
Well, it's good to see all of you guys. And I'm 17 years old, so next year will be my senior year of high school. But let me tell you, I've sure been enjoying summer. I get to work some and travel around, and I get to do a lot more gigs. And I've really just been enjoying it, but I'm already getting nervous that I got to go back to school here in a month or so. Not looking forward to it one bit. But a friend of mine who lives there by us, Lewis Sanders, wrote me this poem about that. It's called Cowboy Education. Seems like only yesterday, school was out for the summer. Now it's the first day of fall semester. What a bummer. As I step up onto the school bus, I can't help but stare at the corrals. I just wave goodbye to my horse as he swats flies with his tail. My best cow dog, who's been with me each and every day, tucks his tail and turns his head. He doesn't understand why I have to go away. Scattered out across the pasture, the cattle are starting to graze. They have no idea that I'll be gone for so many days. Even though they were a little stirred up back at branding time, with a little effort and feed, they're right back to friends of mine. In class, I stare at my books, but I'm really thinking of the ranch, of my cows, horses, the warm sunshine. I look out the window, hoping for a glance. Just a quick glance, that's all I need. Oh, how I want to be horseback, checking waters and putting out feed. My teacher says, snap out of it. You'll never make graduation. But I just smile, tip my hat, and say, ma'am, it seems that school is interfering with my cowboy education. Thank you, guys. Well, how many of you know what black drought is? See, that's how I was when I started learning this poem, and it made a whole lot more sense to me when I looked up what it was, and it turns out that it's a very powerful laxative. So that's what this poem is called, Black Drought, and it's by a great cowboy poet, Larry McCorder. Good Lord, what a dink, I thought. The boss said, put that black colt in your string. I'd rode lots of duds, but none quite compared to that pitifully ugly poor thing. Taylor, he read me just like the good book, and though he probably felt the same way, his heart beat soft for children and colts. So he took a moment to say, give him a chance to prove himself, son. You asked that of me when you hired. Find out his limits and bring him on slow. Don't get him too mad or too tired. Now look at that eye all shiny and bright. He won't win a prize and a ring, but there's something about him I kinda like. Out here, show points don't mean a thing. Well, the boys were sure grinning when I roped him out and took him to the pen that was round. And my face got red as I pulled up my cinch when he squealed and fell to the ground. And thus we started our rocky romance, not liking each other at all. But somehow that little horse was ready to go when we started working that fall. I hadn't stuck a tag on him yet, but name him, I figured I ought. He brought but one thing to my mind, so I dubbed him the title Black Drought. He put on some bone and muscle and fat by our third working season. The boy still grinned at my little black horse, but this time for a different reason. Ever alert, he was easy to teach, really a pretty good horse he had made. One day he even outcut Taylor's ace. The cow boss then offered a trade. I thought for a minute, but then I replied no, although it sure made me feel good. But hell would freeze over and pigs would fly, for he'd pack another man's wood. In the evenings after we'd fed and stripped cacks, he'd taxi me up to the bunkhouse. No saddle or bit, just denim on hide. Then with a hose I would douse. You could say we made quite the team, but friends, he was far from a pet. If I'd fall asleep or things was just right, he'd still try to pile me off yet. One day the ears started to split up the old ranch. And while I'm not adverse to change, they started to run a good place in my mind. So I went in search of new range. The time had come for good friends to part ways. So I went down to tell him goodbye. I stroked his dark hide, felt a wet cheek. I must have got sand in my eye. He smelled at my arm and nipped at my shirt. He'd not seen me like this before, but it just hit me square that we'd be together no more. In the years since I've left, I've been, done, and seen a lot of new things. No matter how hard I try to my bad. I've been, done, and seen a lot of new things in the years since I left him behind. No matter how hard I tried to shake his memory, he still clung to my heart and my mind. I met an old friend down in Childress the other night, and while it might be tacky, before asking of his wife and kids, I said, "Tell me, Dave, how's old Blackie?" Well, a look I'd not seen come over his face. He reached down and got me a beer. With his hand on my shoulder, he led me away, said, "Let's go talk over here." A couple months ago, we had a big storm. That cloud was a terrible sight. The wind blew hard and the thunder was loud. The lightning was flashing all night. We went out to feed the horses the next day, and old Blackie, who always came first, he didn't show up with the rest of the bunch, and we began to fear for the worst. Taylor and I rode out there and found him. He lay all alone on the hill. Well, boss, there's no good way to tell you, except to say he's laying there still. A strange thing happened with that little horse. He was so good with you there, but after you left, he turned for the worst. Seemed like he just didn't care. He'd linger around the bunkhouse all day, or aimlessly wander around. I really think he was looking for you, but you was nowhere to be found. It sure, the way that little horse whittled, it sure would have tore you apart. I'll always believe that quick lightning bolt gave rest to a poor broken heart. Well, I stood there a moment and I let it sink in. My little black horse had gone on home. I always wonder if he'd still be alive, if I'd have just fought that fool urge to roam. My dreams abound and run with wild horses in my dreams. But he's the main memory I've got. He wasn't the best, but he was my ace, and I sure do miss him a lot. If you call me to ride your range, Lord, you've got works in the spring, I sure take it kind when you hand out the mounts. Old Blackie was stuck in my string. Thank you, guys. Well, how many of you guys were able to make it to the youth performance last year? a decent amount, but I'm glad to see a bunch of you coming back, but I'm really glad to see so many new people. And really the reason I'm asking was to see how many people had seen or heard my horse story. And I think there's a couple of you who probably need to hear it, and I'm not real proud of it, but I guess I'll go ahead and tell it. So there at our place, we have a couple horses. We always leave one out, and they stay right there on the property. And it was the middle of winter. There was about 8 inches of snow on the ground, and every morning I'll get up and build a fire. So on this particular morning, I was out of fuel in my cup, so I went out to a jug, and it was the yellow diesel jug. So I filled up my cup, and I lit my fire, and I went to pour a little bit of this diesel on it. Well, fire lit inside my cup, and it turned out to be gas. Well, now I've got a cup on fire and a flame going all the way up and hitting the top of our roof. But I'd say I'm a pretty quick thinker, so I just figured, well, there's snow on the ground. I'll open the door and throw this cup out in the snow. It'll all be good. So I open the door, and right about the time that cup leaves my hand, I see my horse standing right in front of the porch. And about half of that cup of gas goes out in the snow, but now the other half is on my horse's butt. And she took off out of there, and luckily the wind put it out pretty quick, and she was all right. But y'all should have seen the face that my parents made when I told them I lit my horse on fire. But on the ranch, you have some interesting wrecks, but there's those you're proud to tell, and some you aren't. And this poem is about one of those stories. It's Buck Ramsey's Bad Job. Well, if you see me sitting sorrowful, all busted and stove up, you wonder how a puncher gets that way? Well, I can tell you at the start off, to avoid all work aground, if you rope and ride a horseback for your pay. Now it's okay to shoe your horse and to braid and mend your tack, all that work aground that keeps you in the saddle. But your mind gets misdirected if you try your hand at chores beneath stomping out the broncs and punching cattle. Now old Major Domo, he'd come arouse me down at slack, suggest I patch his roof or plow his garden or do some post hole digging or go scale some big tall windmill. But I'd always say, please, I beg your pardon. But it just so happens that one Sunday I was early in from town, holding down the bunkhouse all alone, when the boss, he done convinces me that if I pull just one chore, tack and hack hooves the next day would be easier done for sure. He said them horseshoes is up in a whiskey barrel, up in the barn hay loft, right next to that hay loft pulley door. And though it took us 5 to hoist 'em up, well, I figures coming down, all that gravity is worth them 4 men more. Well, I'm nowhere near a horse, so it makes good sense to me. I dons my boots and spurs and grabs my chaps. Then I ambles to the barn, up the ladder to the loft, thinking I can get this job done in a lope. I ties a big old jug knot tie around that whiskey barrel, then runs the rope out through the pulley to the ground. Then I delicately balances that barrel on the edge, and I rushes out to gently let her down. I takes the rope behind my tail and puts a hitch in front to control the downward progress of the barrel. And it gives the jerk that tilts that barrel out of the loft. And this is the insult that begins our little quarrel. You see, that barrel had to weigh 200 pounds, more than twice what I would weigh, all 400 pounds, more than twice what I would weigh all wet and dressed. So when I tell you that that rope hitch hitched and slipped up underarm, well, I guess you can figure most the rest. I plumb parts with earth quite suddenly, blasting for the sky, and I meets that barrel about halfway up. Well, this wreck, it slows my progress some, but not for long, 'cause I'm heading straight for that pulley and yard arm. Well, as the barrel reaches the bottom and my poor old head hits the top and rings that pulley like a midway gong, where the fellers swing the hammers for to show off with the ladies, you might think that it's over now, but you're wrong. See, the crashing of that old barrel, all weighed down with them shoes, caused the bottom to bust out and dump its load. So I'm plummeting from heaven now at about the speed of sound, and I'm heading for a dangerous dead-end road. Well, that devil barrel slaps me blind and sideways once more as it flies up and I'm a-crashing down. You'd think this stubborn accident would about be played out now, as I breaks a few more bones upon the ground. But nope, the rope goes slack and the hitch unhitches. I lie a-gazing up, and gives me up for dead. 'Cause the last thing that I see before I wake up, all splinted up, is that cussed barrel a-coming for my head. Thank you guys so much. You've been a great audience. I think Jenna and Casey are going to come out now, and I'll be back up here in a little bit.